All right. The format of this presentation is that in the hopefully in the first half an hour, I will present um, a certain format or a procedure on how we can a process of how you can read cities, and then we would go step by step into actually um, working with a plan and um, doing the reading along with this. So, if there are people who are not part of their groups and who do not have their sites, you're free to choose any snapshot from Google Earth which you'll feel like analyzing. As we go further, we'll get into that. All right. So, my my topic reads as reading cities in their natural setting, but I think that is for a lack of a better, what do you say, title. But let's just jump straight into the presentation. Um, so I would like you all to just jump in, unmute yourself, and speak. You all don't need to restrict yourself to the chat box, and feel free to turn on your video because it just feels better to be able to see you all. Um, I am not sure if you are able to see me while the presentation is going on. Can you all?
No, ma'am, we can't see you.
All right. Okay. So, is that all right with you all, or should I change the setting for that?
No, ma'am, I think that is fine. Unless you
All
want
right.
to.
Okay, then let's just. All right. I'm I'm unable to do that right now, so I think we'll just move ahead. Yep. So everyone recognizes this place. Is there a lag in the system? Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, we can see your screen.
Um, I have changed the slide. Is the slide changing for you all as well?
Not yet.
We can see the screen. I mean, at least
Yeah,
I can't.
but you can't.
No, I don't know about the others.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
it's
I
still the
can
And
see
we
the
can see,
screen, yeah.
it's
but
still
it
the
was the
first.
first slide.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So everyone knows this place. Come on, just speak up. It's cool.
Yes, ma'am. Sunburn.
Yeah. Do you all know what this place is?
नहीं मैम
It's like a music festival.
Music festival. Yeah.
No. Okay. And
Goa.
I don't know why it's not
Yeah.
going to the next slide. There's
Goa.
going to be a, yeah, it is Goa, but I'm not able to, like, I'm changing the slide, but it's not really changing for you all. So I'm going to restart the sharing thingy.
Ma'am, we can see the screen now. Like the slide
Yeah,
is
but
changing.
now it's changing. Okay.
Yes, it is.
You know this place?
No, ma'am.
Any guesses? No guesses?
Kerala.
Kerala?
South.
No. Even this is Goa. Yeah. This is the Goa that we don't usually see. This is the Goa that you usually end up seeing. Because if it is a place where you end up seeing the places which are more commercial, but you don't always end up seeing uh, the entire of a place until and unless you decide to go and explore a place. Right. So let us just jump into understanding a little more about the undiscovered places or understanding Goa a little more. So, what you see on the right top, wait, what you see on the top right is one of the sluice gates which is used to regulate the tidal waters in Goa. Down there is a jetty point on the Mandovi River. So a lot of there are a lot of islands in the middle of rivers in Goa. So there are these jetties which connect you to the islands, and they do not really have any direct road connection. Although now the government is planning to build a few bridges across, but traditionally they were only connected by boats. And so, if you see the topography of Goa, this is the entire state. Uh, the dark green part is the forested hilly mountains of Goa. Then the grey part adjacent to it is what we call the plateau or the highlands. And what you see is almost 60% of the cover of Goa, which is like a little pale bluish green. That is what is
Ma'am,
the.
we can't actually see the next slide after topography. Like it's not
Oh,
visible, the pictures. Yeah, now we can see
now?
it. Yeah.
Perfect. So if you see this part, yep. So this is
Yes.
what are the plains of Goa, but their height, they are almost at sea level, and some places even below sea level. So every time there is a tidal flow, which is like twice a day, it, you have a high tide. That's when this entire place undergoes a influence of tidal. It's under the influence of tidal flow. Um, so there's this book named Fish Curry and Rice, which describes this beautiful illustration of Goa, where you can see the hills, you can see the meandering rivers which cut across the entire landscape, and they finally join the Arabian Sea. And this is how Goa was um, 2000 years ago. A lot of these tiny bits and pieces of land completely cut across with backwaters and rivers. Um, but it's very different from what we see it in today's times. So, because of the nature of how, wait, because if you see the two rivers here, the mouth of the two rivers here, so that's the area which acted as a really good port and a harbor for ships to come and dock. And due to this great harbor created, Goa has a history of really good trade happening in. So Goa was in those times called Chandor, and now in recorded history we have the last 2000 years, but even before that, Goa was continuously in touch with the rest of the world. Like there are some evidences of it having relations even with Sumer, the civilization in Sumer, and well, we had the Bhojas, the Badamis, and the most recent ones is the Portuguese. So whenever every new ruler came to Goa, they only came and they uh, controlled the trade which is happening from the state. But but they never ended up ruling over the people of Goa. The inhabitants of Goa always had um, a self governance. They paid whoever is managing the port a rent or a tax for their defense or protection, but they never let the person who came and controlled the port rule them, and that's what makes Goa extremely unique in its administration or governance pattern. So that system is called as the Gaukari system, and in today's day, it is called as the Comunidad system. So this Gaukari system of self-governance is an indigenous form of governance, which is actually seen if you read the histories of countries around the world. It can be seen right from places in Africa to Russia, and it is where the people or the community come together and form associations where a representative from each family is part of the functioning or the functioning of the village. And when such communities come together, even if a single person has um, an objection, that person's objection is considered and everyone is heard out. Whereas if you see in today's democracy, if there is a majority, you got to go with the majority. A single person's name may not be addressed. But when it comes to self governance, every person had a stake in their land, and so they had a say. And there was no concept of private ownership of land. So, whatever was the land of the village was collectively owned by the entire village. There was, it's not like I can own a piece of farm and I can own a grassland. So, everyone always came together and took decisions for the entire land. And because sustenance was the way of life, and if you could feed yourself, it was sure that you would survive whatever had to come your way. And this indigenous system even survives to the present day in Goa. But what has happened is that it's kind of superimposed by the current governance system. Um, so if you see here, the pre-Portuguese, they had like a system where you had the Gaukars who were the owners or the representatives of the each household of the village. Then the Zonkars, the Kulkarnis are the accountants, and then you had people who would have particular skills of maybe um, bund building or masonry, and so there were these bunch of people who came together to manage the entire system of land management in Goa. It changed a little during the Portuguese rule, and well, after the um, Indian, after Goa got merged into the Indian state, um, it ended up becoming almost like an agrarian cooperative, and it did not have any rights to self governance anymore. Um, okay, so I want to give you a little bit, I want to just explain to you what these interesting land management practices were and how did they work symbiotically with nature um, to manage their really interesting ecology. I'm going to be switching over to another slide, so maybe the screen will go blank for a moment or so. All right. So So here we have, this is a Google Earth image of Rai Bandar. Rai Bandar is right next to Panjim, and it is along this river, which is Mandovi. It eventually goes and meets the Arabian Sea down there. Okay. So, can you see this clearly, or shall I zoom in a little? Because everyone's screen sizes, I do not know if you all can actually see it.
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
All right.
It'll be nice if you can zoom in for everybody though.
Yeah. Would this be
Yeah.
better? All right.
Yeah, I think this works.
So, okay. So, what we can see here is these are the mangroves. This is the Mandovi River. If you see, this is a small stream of, wait, it's lagging now.
A little bit, yes.
Actually, a lot, because I think I'll just end up talking further and then things are going to change on the screen. Okay, so y'all can see this between the mangroves, this water stream. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
the backwaters
Yeah, we
coming in.
can.
Oh, perfect. All right, and then you have, these are the paddy fields, and there. These are the forested areas. Although initially the forested areas covered this entire part, but in the development as it took place, it kind of wiped away or chopped off the hill and the forest cover on the hill, and now you have like settlement there. And finally, this is the town of Rai Bandar. So what I'm going to do is explain to you all what is the system of land management that they practiced. Okay. Of course, there'll be a little bit of lag, so just go with the flow. Okay. So if you see this area, if it has mangroves. When you have mangroves, it means that the place has brackish water, which means that it does not have only sweet water, even saline water enters the area. All right, which means that it's under the tidal influence from the sea. So at this junction, they have created a gate. So that junction, they have created a gate. So when it's high tide, the water gushes inside. That the gates open with the pressure of the tide, and then the water is channeled into this entire place using, like if you can see here, they've made these tiny canals and ponds so that water continuously keeps flowing in and stays within the system for the longest time. Now you may wonder, why do people want a place to be inundated for longer? It doesn't really make sense for, like in today's times, to, like people do wonder, like why do you want there to be water? They start thinking that there'll be mosquitoes and this and that. But the thing to understand here is that mangroves and the roots of the mangroves are the area where fish breed. And if you've heard, like the staple food of Goa is fish curry and rice. Well, that's what they tried to achieve. They made sure that the mangroves had the perfect breeding grounds and a safe breeding ground for all of the fishes which came into this, and they laid their eggs. And when the tidal movement would go out and it would be reversed, the gates here would automatically shut with the opposite pressure, and it would hold in as much water as possible within the system, which meant that these mangrove areas would never be completely drained of water. It will always have some amount of water, which would ensure that the fish breed better in the region. Okay, and you may wonder, then how do you have paddy fields which are at such close proximity to the mangroves? Won't the water just come and flood in and make the entire paddy field saline? No. So what they did is that along the edges of these mangroves, they made mud bunds, and these bunds would not allow the saline water to actually seep in. And this is a system which was engineered over 2000 years, and it has been kept in this fashion for more than 2000 years. So every time they had monsoon, the water from this hill would rush down. From all of these areas, the water would rush down, and it would wash out the salinity of the area into the mangroves. So over a period of whatever, like century, like there were almost 2 millennia, they managed to reduce the salinity of the area and made this land conducive for agriculture. So of course, now you have regulated your water flow. Now you can grow your rice here. Your rice is going to be like, all of these low-lying areas in the monsoon are going to be perpetually filled with rainwater. So you have a system in which the rainwater is held in. You don't need to artificially irrigate your rice fields. It's going to be self-irrigated, understanding the entire monsoon cycle. And then when the monsoon recedes, everyone knows that monsoon is the fish breeding time as well. So the fish have also bred here, and then as the fish grow a little bigger, the water drains out, and you have your sea which is populated with strong and healthy fish. Now, this is to understand that everything here was understood as being cyclical and interdependent. By making these interventions of a small sluice gate, making these connected canals, and making the bunds, they made sure that they were not trying to overpower nature, but they were trying to work symbiotically with nature, so that you're not wiping one away for the other to survive. So this is just one example of the relation of fishing and agriculture. But they have other such land management practices where they have designated areas for their cattle to graze, designated areas for houses to be built. They would never allow you to build houses in the plains. You would have to build houses only in the little higher levels or the plateaus. So this particular area is a higher region, which is the outcrop, which is why you even have a settlement there. If it wasn't higher and a rocky outcrop, there wouldn't have been any settlement in the region. All right, so let's then continue. So to maintain these land management practices, they had a set of codes. It's kind of like laws, but my screen is not getting shared again. Oh god. Okay.
Ma'am, we can see the screen.
Okay. Okay, now no, it took a lag.
Okay.
Alright. So they had this set of codes which were a verbal, like they were verbal regulations on how to manage land. And the Portuguese, they were really meticulous in recording everything um, whenever they went to a new territory. So when the Portuguese came to India, they saw this Gaukari system of how people were um, governing themselves. And there's also a story, I do not know how true that story is, that it's actually the people, the Gaukaris, the really the elders of the Gaukaris of Goa who went to the Portuguese who were at that time um, near, I think, Pondicherry, and they invited them to come to Goa because um, they were not able to deal with the the ruler who was currently ruling their managing the port there. So there was a little conflict of interest of taxes, etc., etc. So they thought probably the Portuguese would be more lenient or a better option for them, and so they invited them to Goa. So now, more about the law. So in this code, um, this is a oral tradition, but it was written down in the year 1961, just before um, Goa joined with the Union of India. So um, let's just go. Okay. So if you see in this, they have like who's. Okay. Are you able to see? It's not changed the
No,
slide yet,
ma'am, I
no?
think there is an error on the slide. Not able to
Okay.
see.
All right. What do I do?
Can you try again? Huh. Yeah, we just got it. Yeah, we can see it now.
Yeah,
Understanding the interdependence.
it's taking its own sweet time.
That's all right, ma'am.
All right. So here, if you can see who are the members, it has. Oh God. Sorry. How do you lease? How do you um, like they took care of the people who were old and could not really um, work anymore, so they had pensions for the members of the families who were no longer able to contribute to the collective of managing the land and growing their own food. They had rules on introducing water into their fields, on what to do if there are encroachments on lands. They also had different kinds of what do you say, profit sharing practices. So now, since you're farming together, whatever produce comes out of your farm is also going to be shared. So you're going to farm depending on the size of your family. The area you farm will be depending, or area you manage will be depending on the size of your family, and so the share you get will also be dependent on that. So they were very sensitive to the fact that um, food, land management, and taking care of the people were one whole interconnected loop. They did not think of the socio-political aspect as separate, the economic aspect as separate, and it's um, it shows how people were more valued in these kind of systems. So once they understood this interdependence, they had in their laws on how do you like I'll just read this part out. It will appear on your screen a little later. So it says uh, land could be given on long-term lease if it is uncultivated for paddy or for fruit bearing and land with fruit-bearing trees. If the land is in a remarkably deteriorated condition and the collective cannot or are not in a position to carry out the expenses necessary for its improvement, then they would lease this piece of land out to individuals who could um, take care of the land for a period of 9 to 18 years, and they'll then follow the obligation of improving the condition of that piece of land which has been given out to them on lease. If they fail to comply with improving the condition of the land which has been given to them on lease, then they would have to pay a fine which is equivalent to double of the expenses that would have taken the community would have taken to what do you say improve that condition of that piece of land. So this clearly shows that they had a understanding that if land wasn't taken care of, or if like you don't have trees, there's going to be erosion happening. If you do not take care of the erosion, then it's going to lead to a long-term detrimental impact on their entire ecological system. And so people were always held um, responsible for the task that they have promised to take up for the community, because you are no longer an individual who owns land. In today's time, if you own a property and you have a you've decided to build a house, according to easements rights, you're supposed to make sure that you do not cause any interference to your neighbors. But people have become extremely selfish in the way they look at something which is their personal. The larger idea of community has been completely lost, and due to this region, our ecology is suffering across the country. Okay, the lower one, grants. So grants are when the community says that okay, fine, like initially everything was community owned, but with the idea of private property slowly started entering the region, and those lands were then given as grants to probably a new ruler or the people who were settlers of who came with the new rulers. But the community was so strong that they decided that none of these lands would be given away. Like they forbade lands which were necessary for cattle grazing, lands which were earmarked for threshing, lands which acted as reservoirs or which were required for breeding of fish. So they kept all of these things in mind when they were charting out their laws. Um, so if why I'm telling you these things is just keep in mind what is currently happening in our country, and see the nuanced way in which these guys even wrote down their laws. Okay? Oh god. Okay. So now you would wonder why am I going, or why did I jump directly into Goa? So this is my thesis abstract for my masters, and what I'm looking at is how did these governance system, which lasted more than 2 millennia and maintained the ecological balance of the region, how did they manage to do that, and what is it in our current governance system which is unable to keep that up, or where are we lacking, or does the governance structure need to change? Do the way people perceive nature need to change? And if we need to look at all of these things, then we need to map it properly to make a case. Right now, if everyone knows that Goa is under heavy threat of mining. Oh my god, this screen hasn't changed yet for y'all. Alright. So Goa is under a massive threat for mining. And there have been like more than 20 odd organizations trying to stop the mining there. But it's constantly under threat. So until and unless a person maps the larger system, the ecological system which is in danger, and proves to them that these are what this is how the people viewed their connection to the land, and now that connection has been lost. And if you have to now improve the ecology of the place, you need everyone to be a part of that process. Um, so if one has to map the ecological value of a place for any city or any site in today's time, what is the process that you're going to follow? So, so this is a Scottish landscape architect. His name is Ian McHarg. Um, he was one of the revolutionaries of his time who actually put down a system in which we can map ecological values of a place so that our planning is not disconnected from ecology. One of the very important things he says is we have come down to understand nature as something that we will get monetary gains out of, or our surroundings are something which we can exploit for monetary gains. But if you actually see the ecological services that the land is performing for us, then you will understand that that can never be matched by any kind of human intervention that we plan in any landscape. So this is his book, which was written which was published in 1969, and it talks about how do you map the values of ecology and then assign land which is appropriate for the following uses. So if you understand values which you feel need to be conserved, then that if there can be passive activities which could happen, if there are active activities like swimming or running or picnicking, or areas which should be demarcated for residential and commercial, etc. So what are these layers that he is talking about, and what do these layers then translate to is something that is going to be what you're going to be actually mapping right now. So if y'all do y'all have your Photoshop PDFs and your Photoshop files ready and in your groups?
Ma'am, I'll have to check. Just a minute.
Could you please check? It's actually an open question. Does everyone have a piece of, especially the students? For others, I think you all can just take a.
Yes, ma'am. The fourth years have
Yours-
the PDF.
Fourth years have it.
Yes.
The fifth years, do you all have your Octroy Nakas?
Ma'am, I've sent it to everyone. I think everyone has it.
All right. For others who also want to do this exercise, it would be interesting if you all want to study Mumbai itself, take an area which would give you an understanding of the transect of our city. You could probably take it from the national park towards the Vasai Creek, like north south, or you could just go to any of these areas where you're able to cut through. Like here, you have a little water body, a freshwater body, you have a creek, and you have the sea. So if y'all can just take a rectangular transect which cuts across, and I will be then discussing the layers that one needs to see to then analyze such a landscape. And um, this is what I have used for doing the analysis for my thesis. And this kind of analysis process actually helps you uh, achieve a mapped understanding of your site. Like usually we are talking about our site analysis of something which sometimes becomes extremely disconnected, and our design does not really relate to that. This kind of mapping will help you join that link between your site analysis diagram and your actual design on your site. So you want to look at it at a city level. You can look at it at a regional level. Like if you want to see your Western Ghats or the Himalayas, you can even look at it at a neighborhood level. So all we need to understand here is what is the larger ecological system, and try and see that system in relation to um, the built environment. If one looks at Mumbai, and the most common question is that it's already so highly urbanized that we can't really understand what the ecological context is or would have been. You can probably try looking at a 100 or a 50-year-old development plan of Mumbai, which could help you understand what was the ecology of the place and how it has been replaced. And maybe in the future, when we have to probably do a project like Mindspace, we would probably take a different path to designing it. If we have understood well what landscape or what the ecological values of sites are, rather than looking at them as cash banks in our city. All right. So, is everyone ready? Can we start? I will explain to you the layers, and within your groups, you all can just assign one layer to each person in your group, so that parallelly everyone is working, and then probably we like after I explain the layers to you all, we regroup and we discuss the layers. For other people who are not doing this exercise, we can probably have a conversation about what is the argument and how do you create arguments using these layers. So we can have that parallelly. Okay. Back to the presentation. I'm sorry that my internet's lagging so much.
That's okay, ma'am. No problem.
We are running out of time.
Yeah,
Or are we
no,
good
we
with time?
are, but I think it's okay. We can spare a few more minutes.
My lecture was supposed to be till 2:30, right? 1 to 2:30?
No, ma'am, it was actually scheduled to be at between 1 to 2, but we ran out of time,
Okay.
so it was pushed a little. But you can
All
continue.
right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So all right. This is one layer which everyone does know about. Okay. So for air pollution and noise pollution on, I don't know why, is there a, okay, sorry. There's a good 10-second lag.
Yeah, there is.
Okay. Anyway, you all saw a glimpse of that particular map. So I'm just going to continue. So you all can map air and noise pollution in terms of color ranges, so that places which are highways or bustling market streets, they can be mapped in this ways. But also places which are container
Excuse me,
depots.
ma'am. Sorry to
Yeah.
cut you. I just wanted to inform that your presentation is still 2:30 today.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Just all right. So I kind of lost. All right. Yeah. So you can mark it. Okay. Not to forget that there are container depots and other industrial areas also which are high in noise pollution as well as air pollution. So usually we end up looking at only traffic as noise when we look at cities, but we also have construction activities. We have other allied activities in the city which are a very big source of noise pollution. Um, then you have the next, which is um, tidal inundation. So, tidal inundation is all of those areas which are under the influence of your tides. In Mumbai, we have a lot of these areas. Um, we have our Gorai Creek, we have our Manori Creek, we have the Thane Creek. So, all of these creeks are regions which are under the influence of tides, and a lot of these areas have been encroached upon and built upon. So we need to be very aware of um, the areas which have been built on the areas which are under tidal influence. So when you are marking these areas, do not exclude the areas which have been built upon, but actually map it according to whatever would be in the zone of tidal influence. Because in the future, when you have sea level rise or when you have a really high tide, like it happened just a month ago, all of those areas are going to be drastically affected. All right. The next layer we'll see is geology. So, you all know what geology is? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Have you all done anything like this before?
Ma'am, like it's the study of solid parts of the earth and the rocks.
Rocks.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So, if you see this map of Mumbai, it is available on the MCG website. You will see it's very areas which are hard basalt rock. Many of the other areas are very soft rock, or they are sand, or they are mud flats. All because they are reclaimed, and also because when you have continuous tidal action, there is a continuous deposition of sand in these areas. So it's not always that islands like it's not always that through reclamations two islands which are close by get connected. Sometimes it's also because of tidal action or the action of the river in um, there is erosion deposition. It's also due to that some areas can get, some islands can get connected. So if you see Mumbai, it could be a combination of the rivers silting, and it could be we also know that a lot of Mumbai has been reclaimed. So it's a combination of this which has led to this particular geological map that we are seeing. And another thing when we are doing a larger project is to see the compressive strength of the rock structure that you are proposing a project on. Imagine, like everyone knows that areas which have been reclaimed have a very high, what do you say, cost which is going into it. And that is because your soil itself is not supporting the function that you want to put to the place. Rather than forcing our what do you say, ecosystem to perform the way we want to, can we look at it in terms of identifying the areas which the ecology would support certain kinds of activities, and then continue with our development with that understanding. Now we move on to physiography. Physiography is something you'll already know. When you mark out your land features, your water features, riparian features are like if you have a water body, it could be lakes, ponds, streams, anything. The grassy and shrubby area which adjoins the water body is called the riparian area. So the purpose of this riparian area is to um, hold the soil, filter the water as it's entering inside, and um, it also acts like a good habitat for small fishes and tiny amphibian creatures. Then, if you go along bandstand, you'll see that you mostly see these rocky scarps. Some areas along the beach, they are sandy reaches. Some of them have coves. So it is very important that we identify land features for what they are, because each of these features perform their own ecological function. Your beaches perform the function of protecting your soil edge. Otherwise, you'll have extreme erosion. Your riparian edges, they perform the activity of absorbing the flood water and also filtering the water, rainwater, as it trickles into these water systems. Um, and when you have interesting ridges and valleys which lead to the formation of catchment areas for many lakes. Um, Another thing we do map is surface drainage. Okay, for a city like Mumbai, when you have a project which is next to a creek, you always need to take care of what is your surface drainage. Um, are there places on your near your site wherein the water streams have been constricted, probably due to encroachment? Is there somewhere a dense network of streams which are happening, or are there marshy or swampy areas around your site? And uh, yeah, that is for the constriction. And a map which would ideally be made for surface drainage would be something like this. I'm so sorry. Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am, we just did. It disappeared again.
I know. I don't know why this is happening. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's visible. Ma'am, that is okay.
I'm just trying to do this again so that it's visible for you. There. So
Yes.
this will be the kind of mapping that you would do for mapping your water bodies, mapping the floodplains, and your mapping of floodplains would be done based on the 50-year, 100-year, and 200-year flood line. All right. So I think it is extremely crucial to do it for the case of Mumbai because if you have to do any kind of construction next to these floodplains, not on the floodplains, but next to the floodplains, then you need to accommodate for the amount of water which is going to come in through making provisions for catchments and other such areas. And then you'll have your slope or gradient analysis, which you all usually do in your site analysis, so I'm not really contesting that. But the purpose of doing okay, hello, yeah. So the purpose of doing this analysis is to get the areas of steep and shallow slopes so that you all don't end up proposing something which leads to further deterioration of the soil or erosion in the areas. And in the end, there's hydrology, where you look at what are the navigable areas, what are the free expanse areas. Navigable areas are usually when you have a certain depth to the um, water, and free expanse is when you cannot have bigger water, like bigger boat movement through the water. And then you understand the relation between that and the kind of activities that happen in the areas. This is actually a map of Vasai Virar region where if you see the Vaitarna and the Vasai Creek, you have heavy sand dredging happening in these areas. So can we then come up with a more accommodative way of allowing for such functions? Like we have sand requirements, we understand that, but can we measure, plan ecologically, and then assign favorable areas for dredging? And all of these kind of planning will eventually help us with coming up with a more appropriate final design. And it is about the argument that you make to finally reach your design. There can be some person who would do the entire mapping and completely disregard it and still aimlessly do what they feel like. But the idea of mapping is to always reflect and review whatever um, you are proposing in the context of ecology. Now you have vegetation and ground cover. Um, this particular mapping helps you understand um, what is the value of each of these covers. A forest cover, definitely everyone knows forests are valuable, but a forest on a steep slope is going to perform more function than just being a habitat and an ecology in itself. It performs a function of soil erosion, preventing soil erosion, um and the same thing, shrubs in areas which are next to water bodies perform the function of preventing soil erosion in those areas when it floods. So um, I'll just hello. Can I
Yes, ma'am.
okay, can I have y'all um, then I do not know how many people are in each group right now, but what I want you all to do is from this list of climate, hydrology, geology, physiology, take up different layers and see which layer is applicable to your individual site. I'm sure all layers may not be applicable to all sites. I completely understand that, but pick layers which are applicable to your site, and in a simple task like take your Google Earth. One second. Take your Google Earth, go to Photoshop, and just all you have to do is make these different land cover markings so that um, you're able to differentiate it with a legend of your own. And after you do that, um, say this is agricultural land, right? What is the value of this agricultural land, and should it be conserved? Should it be allowed for active activities, for passive activities, for residential areas or commercial or industrial areas? I want you all to demarcate or draw all of these different kind of ground covers and then propose what should be the most ideal uh, use assigned for these different ground covers. Like if it's mangroves, you're definitely going to put that under conservation. But you probably could put that under passive activity where you could have walks within the mangroves. If you have agricultural land, then agricultural land is the most fertile land. If you displace people from agricultural land because it's flat and make buildings there, then those farmers cannot go to an infertile piece of land and start again. They can, but it's going to take them a whole lot of capital to then start um, investing to make that land productive. So, in with this understanding, try and assign what would be those ground covers ideal for. Yes, I did use GIS for mapping, Rekha ma'am. And one second. How do you know when a beach comes under land? Okay. Okay. Along the bay, that particular along the bay tab is when it's mainly the coast. Along the bay means the coast. It's accident. It's a spelling mistake. It's not way. It's bay, and it is all of the beaches and all of the kind of outcrops that different features that you see along the bay. They have different purposes. Like if you have sand and sand dunes on your beach, then the sand dunes should never be harmed. Like if you see the case of Goa, what they have done is all of those shacks are actually built on sand dunes. So every time in the past year, all of the cyclones which have hit Goa have completely destroyed the coast of Goa, and that is because these sand dunes, they take the impact of the waves, and they they have creepers which are growing on them which prevent the erosion. The shacks have come, they've just chopped the sand dune in half and put their shack in the place. So it's the shack which gets destroyed, and there's nothing really to take the impact of the waves. So that is how we understand and give value to each of these. So if you want to, like, I will, as you guys are doing your individual maps, um, I will continue to talk in the background about the values associated with each of these physiographical and other layers, so that eventually you all will be able to make a case on the larger planning and whatever you propose on your site. Um, do you all think you all can do it in 10 minutes? If I can get a little feedback, then it would be nice. Or else we'll have to probably regroup some other time, and I should move towards ending this presentation. Gore, what's the scene?
Ma'am, I
Mohammed is his name.
I can't hear you.
His name is Mohammed.
Hello? I
Hi.
know him.
Hello. Yeah, actually I kept the
हाँ
mic
बोल
on mute
ना.
and I was speaking. Yes, ma'am. Sorry. What was the
हाँ
question?
बोल. Like, should I end, or do we really have the time to do something?
Ma'am, after your workshop, you are about to give them a break for half an hour for lunch. So the
Okay.
next speaker will start at 3. We can ask the students
All
if they
right.
want to continue.
Soumya, what I will suggest now, can you do one example of it so that people will understand ki how they have to do it or something?
All right. So I'll just run you through an example, and
Correct.
you all will, yeah. I'm so sorry. One second. Just give me a moment. All right. So, so eventually, you all will end up having sheets in which you're mapping the elevation of, like, the highest here is the dark brown and the lowest is sea level. Can you hear me? Hello?
yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So here the color range is from green to brown, and this is mainly to, in one instance, someone looks at this and they know what is the range that we are following, because usually when we look at contour plans we are looking at the numbers on what is the height, and it is not easy to communicate the height or the peaks and the valleys in a contour plan. The same concentric circles could either mean a pit or it could mean a hill. But when you make a plan like this, it's very easy to visually explain what is the site like. And then you give an analysis for this. You say that your average of your site is at what elevation, there are certain hillocks in them, and if your coastal edge is raised or is it at the sea level? So if you take something like Malabar Hill, it's or Banganga, it's right next to the coast, but it's at a much higher altitude. So this kind of a map is going to help you explain such features extremely easily. Then you do a, a, a mapping of what is the different kind of ground cover, and then this ground cover is um, one second, sorry. Okay. So this is a existing land use plan which you'll find in your MCGM website. So you understand what you have mapped, and you compare that with what is being. I'll just show you the comparisons of it, so then that will be easier for you all to go through. So here you can see there's an historical analysis of it where you can see that there's rapid urbanization. These areas where in 2005 suddenly a large chunk of mangroves have been um, filled up and covered. Then here the gray areas where you see um, mangroves have been what do you say? Mangroves have receded and there's a lot of silt deposition happening. So you can physically show, like you can actually map these things to make an argument. Here, once you make such land cover photographs, you overlay that um, and understand what is then this particular land suitable for. So if you have extremely low lying land which are going to be inundated, then you're going to say that there should be no development happening there because it does not favor um, that kind of human land use. If you have sensitive farmlands, which are you have farmlands which are close to the beach, then you would definitely not tamper with them for the fear of erosion. So you will keep them a low or a moderate development zone. And those areas which are already urbanized but are on flatter pieces of land, that you can keep as open to urbanization. Whereas if there is high urbanization on steep slopes, then you would refrain from doing any kind of or continuing urbanization there, and you could also put forth a request for uh, better planning for such places. I think the last. Wait. Okay. So sorry. This is for uh, this is for a gradient analysis. So the purple is which has very high slope gradient, and the white is which is almost flat. So you do this. I think most of you all do this for your AD site analysis. So I'm not going to go further into this. This is interesting. When you have a little larger site, you see what are the ridges and major valleys being formed in your site. So wherever you can see uh, an outcrop or an extension where the contours are diverging is where you would have what do you say, ridges, and where you have contours which are converging to make a valley. That's where you will mostly have your rivers and streams happening. Um, I'm showing you all of these things is even though we know this, we never really make these maps, and eventually it does not what do you say amount to anything in our site analysis sheet. Now this is where the dotted areas are the farmlands, the mangroves. You have this entire thing marked, but after this, you remember when I showed you the suitability. Now this suitability is the end result of us overlapping the land cover, the slope, the elevation, and then analyzing all of them together to understand what could be high development and what could not be high development. Okay. This is when, if you are going to be proposing something which is next to any kind of CRZ rules, then I would strongly request, I think at least 4th and 5th year students to download a coastal zone plan. Right now you have the CRZ being reviewed in 2019. It's still in the draft stage, but well, I think you should definitely look at what are the provisions under these coastal zone regulations to then understand and propose accordingly. In older time, like we had something called as the no development zone in the previous development plan, but right now we do not have a no development zone. So there have been changes in how the government is looking at development, and we in our stage, if we are not critical to these development plans, and if we do not analyze our ecology, I don't think there's anyone else who's sitting out there who's going to come and fight our fights for us. I think we need to equip ourselves and educate ourselves in manners in which we can make our own arguments and stand for what we believe in if we want to see somewhat of a favorable future where we are still alive. And I think this kind of analysis, these tools, whatever I have explained to you all today, could help you all with making arguments, because right now you have mapped it, it's front of you all, and then you can construct your arguments. Otherwise, it's usually us talking in air that this is under tidal influence, so then we should not do this and we should not do that. But okay, fine, you make a tidal inundation map, you compare that map with your coastal zone regulation map, you compare that with your proposed development plan, you compare it with all of that which is there. If what is on site is not marked as existing land use plan in your area, then you should be aware enough to raise your voice to tell that this is not the way it exists. Many existing land use plans have been falsely marked as development zones so that in the proposed land use plan it can be marked as development zones. So I think all of these analysis techniques helps you with mapping, creating an argument to whatever you want to propose in the future, be it your thesis, be it even your everyday AD site analysis. It helps you locate your design on your site. It helps you understand what is the larger context in which your design lies. I'm sure a lot of your faculty would have kept the program open for debate. They want you all to be able to make good arguments and with credible information which is mapped out, and not just talk in the air for whatever that you want to propose on your site. So just equip yourself as much as you can, and I think it would really help all of y'all in whatever project that you're going to take. Somewhere it's required for us to zoom out and look at larger systems when we are restricted to only our site. So I hope this was helpful for you all. I'm really sorry, Arbaz, that I made you do so much work yesterday till 2 in the night and it didn't really get used. So accept my apology. But thank you so much for being a part of this presentation, and I really hope I was able to, I don't know, convey at least a little bit of what I am, I don't know,
Thank
trying
you.
to present.
Thank you so
I've,
much,
like,
ma'am, for the presentation. I'm so sorry we had to cut through your presentation a little quickly because of the time
Sorry, it's
constraint.
okay.
But it was really lovely to have you back with us today.
Yes, even I felt really, really emotional, like seeing all of y'all. It was amazing.